All right, Del, welcome to the podcast.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
I was telling you right before we got started that you've been a real part of my own journey as a mother. My mom actually was the one who told me about your work right around the time Vaxxed came out.
Okay.
And so it is... I'm so grateful, really, for the opportunity to have this conversation with you today. And I'm always using my voice, my platform, my story to share the message of medical freedom as much as I possibly can, but to have such a reputable voice in the space. I mean, one of the leading voices in the space is just a true honor. So thank you for all of your work, really, genuinely.
Well, thank you for having me. Looking forward to it.
So for those people who aren't too familiar with your work, you were a producer on The Doctors, and I want to hear just a little bit about your work there and how it pivoted to you becoming so instrumental in the vaccine space.
Yeah, so I was a producer on the CBS talk show, The Doctors. I was there when they created it. I actually started on the Dr. Phil show as a producer, and so when Dr. Phil's son created The Doctors, I was one of the first producers working on how we're going to shoot surgeries for the first time for television, how we're going to rate it. It was very interesting to be at the ground floor, so going in with cameras and, doing something that hadn't been done on television. It was really cool. I'll also say it had this incredible Santa Claus factor to it, which made the show a blast to work on, which was you'd have all these people writing in with all sorts of issues, whether it was a debilitating skin issue that was so bad they couldn't work, or a broken back, or a surgery they couldn't afford. And then you would, as a producer, look all around the world for the best in the world at treating that condition or that surgery. Sometimes it's $1 million procedure. And I could reach out to that, expert or doctor and say, hey, would you be interested in coming on the Doctor's television show, doing the surgery on this patient? And then we will, obviously bring attention to the work that you're doing, but, you'll have to do it for free. I mean, I think 100% of the time they would say yes. So you get to take this person that was in a horrible state, give them a life-changing experience, and then bring them on the show and tears and all that. So it was really a great opportunity and a lot of fun. And I did it for many years. But so people understand, sometimes people think I'm an executive producer. I wasn't the head producer of the whole show. I was one of about 7 producers that each one of us had a whole episode every week we had to cover. So if you imagine it's a Monday through Friday show, I would get, one of the episodes would be on Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. And you tape the whole season over the course of, a few months or half a year. And so I was responsible for one show a week. And I was really one of the more controversial producers. I think there's a few reasons for that. I was a little bit older than your average producer. I had been trying to get a film career happening for a long time and sort of backed my way into daytime television. By the time I got there, I wanted to focus on things that I actually cared about. I wasn't as concerned. I think when you're young, you're like, oh, I want to make the producers happy.
Yeah.
For me, I was like, I want to investigate a story I care about. And so I really pushed the envelope of, I think, what the Doctors was planning on doing. So I would cover, if Monsanto, when Monsanto's glyphosate was ruled probably carcinogenic to human beings by the WHO. That happened in 2015, I believe. I reached out to Monsanto and said, hey, you just got the second highest cancer rating in the world, known to man. The top rating is cigarettes, which does cause cancer. The second rating by the WHO is probably carcinogenic to human beings. And so it's bad. This is being sprayed over 90% of our crops. Would you like to come on the Doctors and defend your product? And they said, absolutely. I had never seen someone from Monsanto on television ever, right? And if you grow up, you're in organic. You have this beautiful juice company. I grew up with organic food, macrobiotic family, very natural health. So Monsanto was kind of a satanic figure in our family.
Sure, yeah.
So I got to do bucket list moments like that, oh my God, I have Monsanto coming onto the Doctor's television show. And so I reached out to a guy named Jeffrey Smith, who had written more books about Monsanto, and he was a GMO activist. So would you come on and debate? The head of toxicology is coming from Monsanto. And so he dropped everything to do that. So I did shows like that. Did
Monsanto know that was going to be happening?
They did not.
Okay. They were thinking they were coming on to defend themselves, but really.
Right. And they also remember the doctors is, our sponsors are Monsanto products, Bayer and Merck and Pfizer. So they thought it was a safe place. They just didn't know that I was there. And so I did a lot of stories like that pushed the envelope, were very controversial, especially in the medical space. And then finally I stumbled onto a story of a whistleblower inside the CDC that was saying they were committing scientific fraud on the vaccine safety studies. It's a whole book I could write just about that moment and that experience. But ultimately, that was my exit from television. In order to pursue a story about a whistleblower in the CDC that was saying that vaccines were not as safe as we'd been told and that our government was lying to the people, that was a bridge too far for my producers at the doctors. They weren't going to allow me to do that story. And I couldn't let it go. And so I pursued it and walked away from television to put out the documentary Vaxxed, that's what that documentary was about. And I think a lot of people credit Vaxxed with igniting this medical freedom movement around the world.
For sure. It was what did it for me. I mean, that was in 2016. And my son was born in 2019. So, it started to lay the foundation of having those questions beforehand. Your connection, though, to the vaccine movement, was it more like, hey, there's this whistleblower, this is a good story, I'm a journalist, I need to expose truth? Or was there a personal connection for you to that specific topic?
There was a personal connection that I didn't really think. I don't think I thought a lot about it at the time, but I hadn't been vaccinated as a kid. My mom was, like I said, none. So I, grew up. My mom homeschooled me. They were total hippies. The big stories they would tell was marching in Chicago in the 1960s and the Chicago 7. And so I grew up with a different set of heroes and perspectives of the world. I believed my mom would march against everything she thought she had an issue with, whether it was a nuclear, there's Rocky Flats nuclear plant outside of Boulder. We would go and march. Sometime I was a little kid. She was very into activism. And so
go mom.
I was raised a little bit differently than your average bear. And so, but when you're not vaccinated, at least growing up the way I did, it wasn't something I didn't really talk about with my friends. It was a weird topic. We just did things differently. The only times it seemed to matter was, I remember really, the one time I really remember was going into high school. After I'd been homeschooled in 10th grade, I wanted to be in a public social place. So, trying to get into high school in Boulder, I remember the high school was pushing back, saying your kid's not vaccinated. And so my mom took me to the meeting with the principal. And that was one of the things I really loved about my mom, was she didn't fix those problems on her own and leave us in she would drag me everywhere. You're going to see, she would say to me, prep me for this. You're going to watch me have a conversation with this principal. You're going to have to do this with your own kids, because she assumed we would all do this. But she, eventually the principal said, we have a vaccine mandate in this school. She's like, yeah, but the state of Colorado allows my son to opt out of that. I forget if it was a religious exemption or a personal belief exemption. But he said, but our school doesn't accept that. And she said, let me just ask you something. All of your kids in the school are vaccinated then, is what you're saying? He's like, yeah, 100% vaccinated. She's like, so if my kid's not vaccinated, what threat is he to your kids if vaccines work? And he was really stymied by that. He's like, I guess you make a good point. And so I got in. But other than that, it wasn't something I carried. I had my first baby by the time I was making Vaxxed, and we had vaccinated him. I think he was maybe a year old, something like that. So it was something I was doing, not like I wasn't broadcasting it. In fact, I probably might not even made Vaxxed had SB 277 at that exact moment. That's, I was trying to pursue this whistleblower story, and I got called to the stage one day. We have an interview that's going into your show, so why don't you come over to the stage? We got to put it in really quickly. And so I ran over to the stage, and it was Senator Richard Pan, who's the senator that brought SB 277, the law that was going to forcibly vaccinate every kid in California. So I ran over this. I'm taking notes and thinking, oh my God, this guy is the end of the world that I grew up in. Like, I won't be able to raise my kids in California the way I was raised if this guy gets away with this. That probably really triggered my passion to make Vaxxed, to tell that story. I might have left it alone if I could have been left alone. But now Senator Richard Pan I felt like my life was under attack.
Yeah.
And I joked at times, I'd like to erect a statue of Senator Richard Pan. They'll say Andy Wakefield, was the godfather of the anti-vaccine movement. I don't know if he was more powerful than Senator Richard Pan. That law ignited, lit a fuse, and woke, the bear inside of me and mama bears and everyone around this country, especially in California. But without him, I don't think this movement would have grown the way that it did. And so that was a huge, reason I also focused on making this film.
This idea of like waking the bear of parents, that's something that's so in my heart to say, like, unless there are studies and there's safety and there's absolutely no risk whatsoever, like nothing is getting injected into my children. And in a lot of ways, I want that inner bear to be activated in more parents. Like, why are we outsourcing the power so readily when the science is actually not there? And so my question is, and this is kind of the conversation I wanted to have with you as a foundation for this podcast, is there tends to be like an echo chamber in the wellness space where like the people who care about wellness and vaccine safety, like we're all talking at each other with each other, like, come on, why can't more people pay attention? My dream is for this specific podcast episode to be a resource for parents who, I personally know some of them, where in the beginning of COVID, it was COVID vaccine, or you can't see my children, you're not coming near us. And now their eyes are being opened. There's a crack in the door for some people who are understanding that maybe it's not what they always thought it to be when it comes to vaccine safety. So for those parents, I guess my question is, what can you share with them in regards to this idea of vaccines being safe and effective and being that there being robust studies to show that that's not actually the case? What they think is happening is not actually happening. And yes, that's my question for you.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm on this podcast for exactly the same reason. I do my own show, The High Wire, to try and enroll as many new minds to the reality of what's happening with science and medicine. First of all, I acknowledge to every parent that, you are supposed to believe in your doctor. You are supposed to be able to believe in your doctors, your scientists, your regulatory agencies. In a great, noble world, that's how this world is supposed to work.
Right.
It's very shocking to recognize that especially your regulatory agencies are not working in your best interest. And I think I'd like to start the conversation by trying to meet, where would that starting place be where we might find common ground before I take you into one of the most implausible stories you've ever heard in your life and is affecting the world. To begin with, I would say to anyone when I start this conversation, do you believe that the pharmaceutical industry only cares about people? Is it the most noble industry you've ever heard of? Is it just designed to care about people? It always overrides the bottom line, the dollar, does it put money aside, and does it always just, take each person's individual's health as their primary motivating factor? Mm-hmm. I've never asked that question of anybody, not of any, doesn't matter what party you're from or what you believe about the medical industry. Everyone will say, well, of course not. Of course not. I recognize that the pharmaceutical industry puts out products all the time, that they get sued eventually. We find out in lawsuits that they always knew that Vioxx caused heart attacks. They always knew that, we find out I think the biggest one really is talcum powder, the Johnson & Johnson baby powder. I mean, this company let us sprinkle that on our naked babies and on women in shower to shower each day. Remember that commercial, knowing that it caused cancer because they could never pull the talc away from asbestos. Apparently, when you mine for it, those two things are always right next to each other. They always knew it. You see all the internal emails, and they made a decision. You know what? We'll be able to afford the lawsuits. We're going to make so much money, it doesn't matter. So we've watched that happen time and time and time again. This industry has paid out billions and billions in dollars in damages for lying about what? Safety. The safety of their products. They claim they did safety studies. And remember, on top of that, the FDA somehow, under HHS, FDA, CDC, these regulatory agencies all looked at the data and approved that these things were safe. And so now you have to recognize this pharmaceutical industry will put out products knowing they harm people. Your regulatory agency somehow doesn't have the proper stopgaps in place to actually catch a product because it just believes whatever the pharmaceutical industry says. And one of the things that really shocked me when I got into this investigation as deep as I have was I honestly thought, and I think most people do, that safety testing is done by your regulatory agencies, right? That the FDA or the NIH or CDC, whatever you're imagining is happening there, that the pharmaceutical industry has a product that we think it's great, and then the FDA takes it and challenges it, sort of like a crash test on a car, right? I think we're pretty sure that Ford doesn't do its own crash test and say fives across the board. It goes to a third-party agency that doesn't care about the product at all. In fact, you kind of hope they don't like Ford or don't like, I want the most rigorous test. I want to challenge this thing from every direction there is. I want it to be impacted from the top. I want it to have to roll. I want it hit from the sides and angles you never thought of. Not like, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's
sure.
sort of like that joke of like the self-defense class, come at me like this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. No.
Yeah.
I want to be able to handle anything.
Come at me.
Come at me. And so when you realize that the industry itself is doing all its own safety testing, Pfizer does its own safety on its own products and then comes to the CDC and submits what it wants to tell you is a thorough investigation of its safety. That's how all these mistakes are happening. So to set that groundwork, I think it's important to recognize that that's possible. And so then if we're in agreement, if someone watching right now says, okay, I agree with you. I have read the stories. I do know that they've lied about safety before. Then I would ask, and this is what I do with politicians, are you under some impression that drugs, that cheat the system a lot of times, some good comes, some bad, things are recalled all the time. Are you under the impression that by changing the name to vaccines, like instead of calling it a drug, we're going to call it a vaccine, that somehow now this is a totally different industry? This is, I know it's made by Pfizer, but not the same Pfizer that lied about, those other drugs that got recalled and we found that they knew it killed people before they were put out. This is is there a wing at Pfizer? Is there a wing at Merck or Sanofi Aventis that they only employ angels there? And they make a product that, is immaculate. All you need to know is that it's safe and it's effective. And there's nothing wrong with it. Nobody is ever injured by this product. I think this is where I want to meet people, because you have to recognize we've been hypnotized by something that actually makes no sense. It makes no sense. Can you imagine driving down the road and seeing a giant billboard that just said drugs are safe and effective?
That's enough for me.
And you'd immediately go, what?
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
I know for a fact drugs have been recalled, so they're not all safe. Are you saying every drug, every future drug, that they're always safe and they're effective for everybody? My commercials are telling me at the bottom might cause death, restless leg syndrome, anal leakage or whatever the other disgusting problem,
yes.
right? And heart attacks. So somebody's having those experiences, and we know that. So we would never accept drugs are safe and effective as a slogan, yet we have with vaccines. And so then I would ask, what is it about a vaccine that transcends all the obvious problems drugs have? Drugs can't be taken by everybody. Drugs do have reactions on some people it works for, some people it's really dangerous. Why you have a doctor? A doctor knows, oh, you're having one of those side effects, let's immediately take it off. Oh, you're about to get a vaccine, you don't want to be on this drug. We hear that in the commercial. What is it about a vaccine that is somehow safer than that? Is it what it's made of? Because if you look at the ingredients in vaccines, a lot of them are the same types of compounds, right? There's heavy metals, there's aluminum. We finally just got mercury out finally because Robert Kennedy Jr. Did that. We've got formaldehyde, polysorbate 80, monosodium glutamate, things that we know people are allergic to that alone. Now you're going to inject that, propylene glycol. Now add in also, now you have living organisms. You have bacterias or viruses, sometimes living or sometimes partially killed. Does that suddenly make imagine a drug that you just added viruses or bacteria to it? I would think, holy cow, that's got to be even more potentially dangerous, right? And then add in foreign proteins. Now imagine that if I'm going to get a heart transplant or a transplant of any kind, what is the big issue you have? That your body doesn't want to accept foreign body parts, right? So usually someone getting a transplant is on a drug the rest of their lives to shut down what? Their immune system from attacking that new, unfamiliar organ. Yet in vaccines, we have chopped up billions of pieces in the MMR, the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, of an aborted baby. I mean, they've grown the virus on the cell lines of aborted babies. That's what they're using as the substrate. Once that virus is grown there, you can't take it away. The protein goes in with it. So you have foreign proteins from a different baby being injected into your baby. There's foreign proteins from hamsters and monkeys and worms. So I think if you start really, we've never looked at it, right? We saw this slogan, safe and effective, but we never really thought, what would that mean? What would that mean? Is it really, are the things in it less dangerous than drugs? I think if you look closely, it is clear that they have more potential harm in what they can do in the body than most drugs would. Okay? And so then you have to imagine, let's just say they're even. Let's just say they're as dangerous as drugs, Okay, what was the safety? How did you get to safety so that slogan, safe and effective, could be stamped on the side of every one of these things? And that's where this thing really goes south.
Right. That's my question. How did safe and effective come about?
Goes south is they've never been through a safety study.
How could that be?
I just want to let that sink in for a second because, and let me be clear, I say this to reporters in New York Times, and they keep trying. That we're winning more and more ground on this. Okay. It used to be that when Vaxxed first came out, and I was starting to speak out, and to be clear, also, I started a nonprofit, Informed Consent Action Network. I have the most successful legal team in history in this space. We started suing the government of the United States, saying, show us the evidence of your safety trials. I hired scientists to read every single safety study ever done on at least the vaccine program in America given to children. Where was the double-blind, placebo-based trial done to establish that this product is just as safe as if you injected saline, which would be the placebo? Never happened. Not on a single vaccine. They're finally admitting now, mainstream medicine will admit, okay, the current vaccines have not been, tested against a saline placebo because the original versions that we're not taking anymore, those were tested against placebos, and now we just test against the old version. And that's the only ethical way to move forward since you already have a product that exists. That's where this argument is now. They were saying it was misinformation even through COVID, that I was saying no placebo trials on any of the childhood vaccines on the schedule. Now they're admitting that, but we don't have to do them because the previous version's not true. We're going to win that too. This is just taking forever. There's such a dogma around it. But here's the point. A product that at least should be considered as dangerous as a drug is not going through any sort of comparative trial to prove that it's safe to inject into human beings. And there are elements that are more dangerous than be allowed in a drug. Aluminum. Aluminum is a known neurotoxin. There's never been a study injecting in aluminum. Let's just take aluminum, inject it into children or adults at the levels we're going to put in a vaccine and have a saline group. You know why that study's never been done? It would be illegal to do that study. It'd be illegal because is illegal to do a study where you inject a human being with a product that has no benefit whatsoever, only potential harm. So if you were to inject aluminum into one group, you're only subjecting them to the dangers of a neurotoxin with no potential benefit. All right, so they can't do that study. But as soon as they put it into a vaccine, now you just have to assume it's safe because it didn't, it was never tested on its own. And so now you've got this known neurotoxin. And let me just explain something interesting about aluminum. When they want to study allergies in animal models, what they do is they inject a protein, let's say peanuts, into a rat, and then they inject it with aluminum. And the aluminum incites the immune system to see that as a foreign protein and then, exacerbate their immune system to attack and create an autoimmune or an allergic reaction to the peanut. So aluminum is literally used to cause allergies in animals so that we can study it. Yet it's lost on anyone to imagine that this incredible rise in allergic reactions to things like peanuts might be the fact that you're injecting the same toxic chemical you put in animals to inspire an allergic reaction. You're putting it in most of our vaccines right now. So across the board, we can go anywhere with this conversation.
Right.
I can say this. If I was wrong, I should have been sued by now. Merck, Pfizer, Sanofi, somebody should say, Dell, Bigtree, we can prove it. Here is our placebo trials. They can't. Bobby Kennedy and I went, when I first met him, one of the first things we did in the original Trump administration was Trump set up a meeting at the NIH. And Bobby called me because we had two of the biggest nonprofits in this space. He had, at the time, it was called World Mercury Project. It's now Children's Health Defense. I had Informed Consent Action Network. He said, why don't you bring everything that you've studied? You've been winning lawsuits. I want all that information in here. I have an opportunity, Donald Trump sending me to NIH to bring all of our issues to the NIH. In that meeting, Bobby sat across from Francis Collins. I was right next to Bobby. Right across from me was Tony Fauci. I didn't even know who Tony Fauci was. It was 2017. Never really even heard of the guy. Or maybe if I'd heard of him, I just didn't know anything about him, And there's like 10 other world-renowned scientists from our government there. In that meeting, we said, have you ever done a placebo-based trial on any of the childhood vaccines? It got kind of strangely heated and awkward for a minute until they finally admitted they don't do them. They haven't done them. In that moment, you would think it would be over. It's not. That was 2017. I'm still, battling for the mainstream media that wants to believe somehow we're not telling the truth here. Yet, no one, not a single report, and I read it every time I say it, never had a placebo-based trial. They will write, the experts say that's not true. And I say to every journalist, you're a journalist. You've been making that expert statement every time I state it. I've showed you the lawsuits we've won. I've shown you the government admitting it's not there, and yet you are going to trust an expert. Why don't you ask them to hand you the placebo-based trial? Why have we've been doing this for years? I could name the top reporters at every newspaper.
Right.
I was like, we've been doing this for years. How do you accept never being handed the evidence? I joke with them. I usually will say, it would be like Woodward and Bernstein. We're all journalists here. Can you imagine if Woodward and Bernstein called Richard Nixon and say, did you tap the phones at Watergate? No, I didn't. Well, the experts, we reached out. Experts said they did not tap those phones. End of article.
Yeah.
That's what's happening.
Right.
The journalists are just talking to Pfizer, talking to Paul Offit, that's made millions, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars off of money making from vaccines. They go to him. What do you think? Vaccines are safe and effective. Everything Bobby Kennedy is saying is a lie. Well, there you have it. And that's the world we live in right now. It's crumbling.
Yeah.
It's crashing down because more and more intelligent people are saying, wait, there should be evidence to this statement. And that's why I'm here. I just keep demanding some evidence of what you're doing. And more and more and more people and world-renowned scientists and doctors are now coming to our side. Dr. Peter McCullough. I remember when COVID was the huge wake-up moment. You brought that up. Mm-hmm. That brought a lot of scientists and doctors in that would never have looked at this because they just assumed. I mean, watch how Peter McCullough talks about it himself. I just assumed this product I was taking, I'm getting flu shots every year, that they were safety tested. Until COVID, that woke a lot of doctors up. Like, wait a minute, I just watched that thing rushed onto the market. That wasn't a proper safety study.
Right.
And then they would come onto my show and talk about it. I was like, great, come on, tell us how dangerous that vaccine is because I'm trying to keep people from taking. Like, no. He's like, he's like, I've read the studies, it's causing myocarditis, pericarditis. And I would know because I've published more studies on the heart than any human ever in the history of mankind. That's Dr. Peter McCullough.
Right.
But then he would say, but I don't want to make people afraid of the childhood vaccine program. I think I've probably got him saying that on my show, or at least off record. And I would get done with the show and say, okay, great, Peter. I'm wanting to look at all the links to the evidence that we have. They've never done any placebo trials. And now, watch, years later, he's like, I would not give a single vaccine to my kid. Same thing happened with Pierre Corey. Paul Merrick is the most published ICU doctor in history, now says, I don't trust anything that pharma, I wouldn't give a vaccine. So for the first time, COVID has now gotten people to start looking at what I've been trying to get them to look at. And so when you see world-renowned scientists joining that supposed conspiracy theorist Del Bigtree's side, you should ask yourself, what am I? Like Svengali, like I got some like magical powers over world-renowned doctors that are only now putting their careers at risk for saying these things. Right. I say the same thing about Robert Kennedy Jr., to a journalist. What do you think is the motivation? I mean, I'm just curious. Why does a guy who grows up a Kennedy obviously has advantages by carrying that name? Also is probably arguably the greatest environmental attorney in the history of the world, won more cases, is more famed, and was loved by the Democratic Party, so much so that New York tried to just hand him the Senate seat. And he said, I don't want to be in politics, give it to my friend Hillary Clinton, and helped her get her Senate position. Why does that guy suddenly get into a vaccine investigation that just immediately drags him, tars and feathers him, destroys all of his environmental legacy, to the point where I was his director of communications running him for a presidential. We couldn't even get on the news on any liberal stations. This is a Kennedy. They had and this guy, by the way, polling-wise, was the only guy polling from the very beginning that arguably could have beat Donald Trump. Democrats didn't want anything to do with it. So why did he do that? Like, what was it? Why destroy your family name? Destroy the party you come from? Destroy all for what? Like, why? Did he suddenly wake up and just lost his mind? And I'll say that to journalists, and they'll say, I don't know.
Yeah.
I was like, isn't that your job to know? Because that's what I thought as a journalist. I thought we were like lawyers. If I can't prove motive, I can't win this case.
Right.
What is the motivation for someone like Robert Kennedy Jr. to get so locked on this issue that it literally makes him the most hated human in the media after once being hero of the planet, Time Magazine and, New York Times. And why does someone do that to themselves? Unless they see something that is so important that they cannot walk away. I mean, that's why I'm here. That's why Bobby's here. That's why Peter McCullough, that's where there's a line of doctors and scientists now stepping up and, being attacked by every newspaper and still standing the ground because we have a major crisis. We have something so outrageous that's happened and so dangerous to so many children that once you see it, you just can't walk away.
Yeah. Yeah. Something worth standing for.
Yeah.
I watched An Inconvenient Study and cried through the entire thing, just hearing the stories of the children that were affected. And so I want to go there, but real quick, I know, like, even everything you just said, I know because I have family and I have friends who will still say, based on everything you just said and the years you've been doing this, the research you've done, will say, yeah, but if that were the truth, it would be made public. So it would be, someone would tell us, my doctor would tell me, the news would tell me. If that were the truth, someone would be out here making it known. And I'm like, there are those people who are doing it. What is your rebuttal to that?
The pharmaceutical lobby is the most powerful lobby in the world. It's the richest industry in the world. It is buying your politics. It is spending, for every dollar that oil and gas spends to lobby politicians, pharma spends twice that, 2 to 1. So they're spending $2 every time oil and gas spends $1. We have fought wars we've been in unending wars in the Middle East for the funding oil and gas is bringing. What is pharma buying? Why does it need to buy? Why is it buying politicians? What is it buying? I thought it just made products that are good for us. On top of that, it is the number one advertiser on television. Usually between 50 to 70% of all advertising on television is the pharmaceutical industry. Here's another thing people don't really understand. A TV in your house is a billboard. Yeah. You are buying a really expensive and making it bigger and bigger and bigger, a billboard in your house. Mm-hmm. You may see it differently, but when you work in television, it is not lost on any of us. They tell us that. Our job is to keep your eyes on that billboard as long as we can. So if I'm on the doctor's television show, it's what is my ratings in the first 10 minutes? What is my ratings at minute 30? What are my ratings at minute 45? And if as a producer, my ratings are diving off too hard, I'm going to get sat down. You're losing eyeballs on the billboard. And therefore, the advertisers are paying less and less and less later in the show because they're buying eyeballs. And so whether it's a cop drama, a doctor's show, a comedy, a sitcom, a daytime talk show, a reality show, it is there to make you buy products. Mm-hmm. And when the pharmaceutical industry is buying 50 to 70% of the advertising, that means they own the majority. They have the majority share of all the content happening there. They actually get to say whether they like what that content is or not, because by pulling their funding, you can't do your show. Mm-hmm. And so that is true for news also. And if someone wants to challenge me on this, just when you're watching your news show, watch the commercials, count them, and then just say how many of those, like 3 commercials per break, were 2 of them pharma? 1, 2, 3, how many? And then just watch throughout a day. Just become conscious of it, and then recognize that if they hold the majority, that news anchor cannot say or do a single story. No reporter can do a story that is going to make that industry look bad. Mm-hmm. And that is why you are never going to hear this story on television. Your news anchor is employed by the pharmaceutical industry.
Bam. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That was extremely helpful. So tell me a little bit about An Inconvenient Study then. Give me the basis of it.
So if we're right, which we are, but let's just say they've never done a double-blind placebo-based trial. Mm-hmm. But let's say even if they had, let's say they had done multi-year trials, just like every cancer trial, every drug we take is going through this process. Mm-hmm. But just like a drug, something got missed. Mm-hmm. And remember, when we're thinking about there's difficulties to this. For instance, if autism used to be 1 in 10,000, if a product is causing that, it'd be you'd literally have to have like 20,000 people at least in a study in order to capture one, right? So then if it's a 1 in a 1,000 issue, again, you're going to want 10,000 people. So you have to have super large studies. And then you have to ask yourself, how long does it take to develop that side effect that would, and so if, for instance, let's call it an autoimmune disease. Let's say multiple sclerosis. I think everyone knows multiple sclerosis doesn't happen overnight. If there's a product you're taking that incites multiple sclerosis, odds are it would probably take 2 or 3 years for it to develop. So the study is going to have to be at least 2 to 3 years long, where one group got the product, one group got a placebo, then we track them. That's why most studies are at least 2 years long for drugs, often 5 and 10 years long. For a vaccine like COVID, which was a brand new technology that potentially could insert itself into our DNA, mRNA, there is concern that it can reverse transcribe itself into our genome, which would be potentially very, very problematic, not just to the people taking it, but to future offspring. That study should have been the longest we ever saw. And we watched with our own eyes. It didn't last but really a few months. So right there, you saw it with your own eyes.
Right.
You saw that was not your average vaccine. That was a mRNA inserting technology, like CRISPR in a way. Why did we rush that product on the market? Anyway, even if you'd miss these things, we see people lined up by the millions now around the world with injuries they're claiming happened right after vaccination. The biggest one, autism. If you're going to rule out autism in vaccinations, you're going to have a group that got vaccines and then a group that got none. That study has never been done. Okay, I know the news has told you there's mountains of evidence.
For sure.
They're the most ridiculous. That mountain is the most ridiculous mountain you've ever seen. Usually it's they will say, they'll look at a group of kids that got every vaccine plus MMR, and then a group of kids that got every vaccine but didn't get that MMR shot, and then say the autism was just as high in both groups or close to it. Therefore, vaccines don't cause autism. You might have extrapolated that MMR isn't increasing the risk, but unless you've disproved that every other vaccine doesn't cause autism, then your control group is taking products that cause autism. This is the problem with this, and that's what's been done so far.
Right.
So if we were going to get to the bottom of these conversations, you're going to have to do a comparative study between those that receive vaccines and those that get none. Now, it's unethical to do that study prospectively, meaning I'm going to deny one group access to vaccines their whole lives. Like you're just, we're going to give you a placebo. You won't know it. So now you're going to be at risk for all these diseases, but you don't know that you weren't getting the vaccine. That can't be done. But there's parents like you and me and, those of us would be happy to put our children up for a study and say, we've already made our choice. We're not vaccinating, not because we want to, we're just not going to do it. And so what would be great is if you could get enough people like that to compare these two groups. Take those people who have already made the decision not vaccinate their kids and track their health outcomes to those that are getting the vaccines. And so that's what is at the center of An Inconvenient Study, the film. I challenged a world-renowned scientist that someone put me in touch with. It was in 2016. I was traveling the country with Vaxxed, the documentary I just put out, and someone said there's the head of infectious disease at Henry Ford Health, which is in Detroit, Michigan. He's a friend of mine, and I've asked him if he would have dinner with you, and I said, great, yeah, I'd love to do that. And so the doctor's name was Dr. Marcus Zervos. And he met me for dinner, and we sat down, and really actually tremendously nice guy, open-minded, stated right up front, I'm a huge fan of vaccines. Just want to make that clear. I'm only sitting with you because we share a mutual friend. Okay. He said, but I watched Vaxxed. He's like, it's very compelling, He said, but he's like, I've been watching videos before I met you. I looked you up online, and you've got all these videos out there. You keep saying something that I find very troubling. You kept saying that they've never done the proper safety studies to establish that vaccines are safe. He's like, obviously, I'm head of infectious disease. I take issue with that, and I sit on the biggest databases in the world. So I went and to gather that evidence so I could bring it to you and hand it to you at dinner. And he said, and I am shocked that I have to sit across from you and tell you you're right. He's like, I really didn't know that. I did not know. We have never done a placebo-based trial. And he's like, and he said, look, that doesn't mean that vaccines aren't safe. It just means we can't say that they're safe. Right. And I said, and yet you do every day on the television, everywhere we look, every doctor are just stating safe and effective. Every billboard, every statement made is not a scientific statement. He's like, yeah. He's like, it's problematic. He's like, but I don't know what I can do about it. It still doesn't make me not believe in vaccines. I was like, well, would you ever, since you are one of the lead scientists at Henry Ford Health, one of the greatest research institutes we have in the world, would you ever do a vaccinated versus unvaccinated study? And he said, yeah, I would do that. And, it took a few years. I had to keep calling him, prodding him. But by 2020, 4 years later, he finally did that study. It's the biggest of its kind. Over, I think it's like 18,500 kids. 2,000 of them are unvaccinated. Parents had made the decision to not vaccinate their kids. And they just compared health outcomes in that group. And suddenly 2020, I find out he's done the study and he's refusing to publish it. Won't put it up for peer review. And I was like, what's happening?
Yeah.
He's like, I can't. I said, you promised no matter what happened, you would put this study out. That was our agreement. I said, look, you obviously have a bias towards vaccines. I love that.
Yeah.
Unlike the rest of this world that only wants people that believe in the product doing their safety studies, I want the opposite, right? I want someone to try and prove me wrong. I don't want to be proven wrong by someone you think is on my side. I don't want Robert Kennedy Jr. doing my study for me. I want the head of infectious disease, the guy that just told me unequivocally, I believe vaccines are the greatest invention of the 20th century. You do that comparative study. Right. And then he wouldn't publish it. And he ended up saying something at one point. He said, Del, when I agreed to do this study, I did not realize I was agreeing to end the childhood vaccine program. That is, I'm not up for that. I was like, what do you mean? I mean, how bad is this study? Yeah. He's like, it's really bad. It's really bad. And so I didn't know where to go. I kept challenging him to do it. Finally, after 2 years, I was sick and tired of it. And you have to understand, I'm still doing interviews of all these children with autism and children that are dying after flu shots and paralyzed after Gardasil vaccines. And I'm like, this could all be ended. We have a study now that shows certainly for some group of kids, there's some group that are not reacting right to these products, and their parents are being told to walk blindly off this ledge with their kids, no idea. And by the way, every one of those kids, it's really important to point out, their parents believed in the vaccine program, right? Mm-hmm. They suddenly get labeled anti-vaxxers the second they watch their kid crash. They're playing soccer one day. They go for their physical, to get their Gardasil vaccine. Oh, they're 12 years old. They need their Gardasil vaccine. And then they watch their kid frozen in bed and never walk again. Yeah. Okay? And so I finally called Dr. Zervos and I said, hey, I'm going to be coming through Detroit to do a speaking engagement. Why don't we grab some dinner? And he agreed. And I took hidden cameras and recording equipment to that dinner. I wanted a natural conversation. I didn't want cameras in there because I was afraid. First of all, I don't think he would agree with it. Right, yeah. But I didn't want him performing for cameras. I want to know honestly, what do you think?
So why was it so bad?
Well, I mean, he handed me the study at that dinner, and the conclusion was the vaccinated were 2.5 times more likely to develop a chronic disease than the unvaccinated. 6 times more likely to have a neurodevelopmental disorder than the unvaccinated. Nearly 6 times the rate of autoimmune disease. And just because I look at statistics and numbers, and it's hard to wrap your head around what that means. But we're not talking about a 60% increase. We're talking about a 500 to 600% increase risk. That's off the charts. I mean, it's so astronomically huge. It's unbelievable. And then I think the most shocking part of the study is they do a sort of time to date over the course of 10 years. What is the likelihood that a vaccinated child in their group would have a chronic disease compared to the unvaccinated? And what it found was that 57% of the vaccinated were going to have a chronic disease by the time they were 10 years old. And only 17% in the unvaccinated. So it doesn't mean not vaccinated makes you like immune to all autoimmune disease or issues.
Still living in a modern world.
But clearly, until there's another study to overcome this, that is the most damning indictment of vaccines that has ever happened on this earth. And it wasn't done by me. It wasn't done by someone that was trying to prove that vaccines are dangerous. It was done by an institution and a scientist that was trying to prove that they're the greatest things that ever existed. So that's the heart of the movie. And that dinner, though it's a bunch of shaky footage and looking through wine glasses, it actually is. It turned out better than I thought. It's a weird element to make a film with that much sort of raw footage.
Yeah.
But by the time you get to it, it's even if you just watched it as a human study, to watch Dr. Zervos, who I think you can clearly see is totally torn apart.
Yeah, there's a struggle.
I think you can tell, he even says it, he wants this study to be out there. He knows it's important, but he admits, I am not one of those people with the courage that it'll ruin my career. It will ruin his legacy. He will be remembered for that one thing and not all the other great things he's done in his career, because this industry is so brutal to anyone that ever challenges it. And so again, when you ask, wouldn't I know about it? How many doctors have looked the other way? Zervos, if I'm not in this mix, no one knows this study ever exists. This film doesn't exist. This study would have been done and no one would know about it. So my question is, how many times has this study been done by world-renowned scientists who all must have seen this result and have never shared it with the world because it would destroy their careers? That's the question I ask in the film. Because for anyone out there that wants to cling to the belief that their doctors are right, or that the CDC is right, the vaccines are safe and effective, let me be really clear. They hate me, okay? They hate Robert Kennedy Jr. And they hate every doctor and scientist that is now jumping on board with this conversation.
Right.
It is not lost on them that the easiest way to shut us up forever would be to do the obvious study. Compare vaccinated kids to unvaccinated kids and show us it's what you said. This product makes kids healthier, makes them live longer. They actually have lower rates of ADHD. They have lower rates of autism. The vaccinated have lower rates of autoimmune and neurological disorders. If they could produce that study, we'd be done. I wouldn't be here. What argument would I have? How is it that not a single, are you telling me not a single doctor, not a single scientist didn't even occur to them that the study was possible? It's literally the study we do with all products. Compare one group that got it to the group that didn't. So it can't be lost in how effective that study would be.
Right.
So I have to, and so not a single major medical institution, not a single government agency in the world can do that study or has done that study to show us the vaccine are healthier. And as we point out in the film, this is the biggest of its kind. It's definitely the first time we've seen it done by what you would say rabid pro-vaccine people.
Right.
But it has been done between 6 and 10 times, depending on how you want to look at that study, homeschool studies, things. And every time one by Dr. Paul Thomas, who's a pediatrician, who just was open-minded. I'm going to vaccinate the kids that want to be vaccinated. The parents, that don't, You don't have to in my practice. He ended up having tens of thousands of children in his practice. He compared what were the health outcomes of my kids who were vaccinated compared to those who were unvaccinated. As soon as he published that study, his license was under attack, and he had his license taken away for doing that study. So here's what we know. Every time this study's done, the vaccinated are the sickest kids among us. And now it's been done by a major medical institution. I must say, it's unpublished. Henry Ford has sent me a cease and desist letter saying, it's defamation to say that we didn't publish the study because we didn't like the outcome. We didn't publish the study because it's a bad study. It's bad data, and so.
How could it be bad data? It was their data.
That's it. It's their data. It's the same data they use to do all their other studies. Not sure why this is suddenly bad or corrupted data. And if you question the methodology of the study, isn't Dr. Zervos the guy that was the head of your Moderna trials for the Moderna vaccine? Didn't hear any complaints about him then. So, and he says it, right? So what's so sad, he says the reason I can't publish this is they will say it's a bad study. They will tear me down and they'll destroy me. And I'm not up for that. And sure enough, that's the argument they're making.
But you even said to him at the dinner, do you feel that this is a good study?
Yeah.
And he said, yes.
Is there any way this study could be done better?
Yeah.
Not that I am aware of.
That's what he said.
You can see they do challenges of the outcomes of the study. They don't like the results. So they're saying, is it because there's more African Americans in this group than that group? And they run side tests. Like he's stress testing it from every side because you can tell he doesn't like the outcome. And none of those stress tests change the outcome.
Right.
So
it's an incredible documentary, and I hope that this glimpse of this conversation that we've had today opens the door for people to at least be willing to watch it. Ross and I were talking before you came, and he said, how do we get, some of my particular family members to share that documentary? And I said, babe, that's not the question. The question is, how do we even get them to watch it? Because they hear the topic of the conversation and they say, nope, not going to watch that because I don't understand that personally, but I think it would change the paradigm of life that people operate in too much to actually see some of these truths, that it's like, I'd rather just put my head in the sand and not look at it. But you're talking about our children's health. You're talking about our future. You're talking about our lineage, the next generations. There's nothing more important than having this conversation. And so my prayer in this dialogue is to at least crack open the door a little bit more so at least people will go watch that documentary.
That's the only reason I made it is, it's only the second documentary. For years I've just been doing my weekly talk show. But I think, first of all, it's already had well over 55 million views, so it's probably nearing 100 million views worldwide. I love the review it's getting, which is so many people keep reaching out and saying that loved one that wouldn't listen to me finally watched this documentary, and they said, oh, I get it now. And the comment they're saying is what they liked about it was that it wasn't heavy-handed. We just let the science speak for itself. We show you our evidence of how we know what we know, and you can hear from a world-renowned scientist telling you why he won't publish his study, admitting what's in that study, how he thinks it's a great study, and he thinks this study should be done. I think we should all know that. I think you have to know that. And lastly, I would just say this. There'd be no reason to listen to me. There'd be no reason to even care about this issue if we had the healthiest children in the world.
Right.
If our kids were running around and they're just shiny and happy and glowing and healthy, then what difference does it make? If there's a couple of kids, I think that's where it's at. Well, I think it's just a couple of kids being injured. We have the sickest nation of children in the world. At least in the industrialized world, wherever there's clean running water, our kids are the sickest there's ever been. At over 54% of them have chronic disease if you include obesity in there. I think 40% without obesity. So it's a coin toss now. Something's doing it. You know it. We know it. We didn't grow up this way. There was one kid in my entire school with an asthma inhaler when I was a kid. There's now 1 in, I think it's 12 kids has asthma. A debilitating, can't join the military, can't be a star athlete most of the time. And that's just one of the minor issues, ADD, ADHD, but also lupus and multiple sclerosis and gut and bowel diseases and eczema and, all of those things have skyrocketed. In the 1980s, when I was a kid, there was only 12.8% of our kids had chronic disease. Now 54%, 40, 50 years later, that's the greatest decline in human health that has ever been recorded. And so before you, find yourself once again wanting to just put your doctor or the CDC or the FDA up on a pedestal, recognize that under their watch, we have seen the greatest decline in human health that has ever been recorded. Something's gone tragically wrong. Something is making our kids really, really sick, permanently sick. It's a coin toss whether your kid is going to be sick their whole lives. That's not natural. I just want you to know, and for young parents out there, it's not natural. That wasn't what my parents had to worry about. And sure, we can say it's a toxic world. How do you know it's not the air? How do you know it's not the pollution in the air? How do you know it's not the fluoride in our water? How do you know it's not the pesticides and herbicides sprayed on our crops? How do you know it's not the plastics or the forever chemicals? All those things. I'm investigating all of those things. And so is Robert Kennedy Jr. And we finally have government agencies that are investigating those things because they're not working for the industries that we were supposed to have been protected from. It's the first time ever. This is the greatest health department you've ever had because it's not owned by the industries. It is, and of course, the news is attacking them because the news is owned by those industries, as we pointed out. But if you want your child to have a chance at health, to not be a statistic, a coin toss, then you're going to have to get more involved. And I hate to say it, I know you checked, the baby carriage and how the car seat did in the crash tests. And I know you did the work on whether I'm going to use glass or plastic or stainless steel baby bottles. And you're reading the labels on food. There's one place I'm not a doctor. I cannot be responsible for this. I want one thing I can do, which is to hand my baby over and trust that has at least been taken care of. And what I can say is that is the least tested, least proven, most likely reason the immune systems in our children are now failing because we're not giving 1 vaccine or 10 vaccines or 20 vaccines or 50 vaccines, 72 and counting. 72 times we are messing with the immune system of your child with a product that has never been safety tested. And maybe it's not the one. Maybe it's 10 at one time that's never been tested. Maybe it's the accumulative. Maybe 72 was going too far. Maybe we should do what Denmark is doing, half that. They don't have the level of autoimmune disease we have. Maybe. But here's what's for sure. You cannot accept that there's any product in the world that we live in right now that shouldn't be tested again, that we shouldn't take a closer look at, that we shouldn't put back on the table and say, hold on a second. This is the same industry that has lied about safety and paid out billions and billions and billions of dollars on all their other products. Why would this be any different? Why is the news attacking Bobby Kennedy? Because he wants to study those. And he wants to get the chemical dyes out of our food. And he wants to get maybe the fluoride out of our water. Why? What would be the harm in reevaluating the safety of all these products? Because I'll be honest, even things I believe in, I want the people that hate it more than anything to be the ones challenging it.
Right. Right, for sure.
If you believe in vaccines, you should love that I'm here. You should say, yeah, test this product because I'm assuming it is and I think they're going to prove you wrong, but you shouldn't be silenced.
Right.
Right. I want that. I want my car I'm driving. I want the biggest lunatic. I want someone that hates Ford.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
Trying to bust this thing apart. And then when I see 5 stars, holy cow.
Yes.
That must be a safe car.
Yes. Wow. Thank you for that. It's incredible. And this is just going to be a really helpful resource that I'm so grateful for this conversation. And I want to come back to some of these questions that I got sent in from my community. And one of them is around the MMR vaccine. Are the doctors currently giving the separated MMR vaccines as suggested by RFK, and when will that go into action?
No.
Okay.
To my knowledge, the separated MMR is not available in America. I have heard people say that they've gotten one, and then when I go to other doctors and scientists, like, it's not possible. It's not allowed in America, not yet. That's what Marty McCary is looking at. We're looking at, do we offer your ability to separate those 3 vaccines? And be clear, there's some really interesting studies. Japan got panicked by the 3. They broke it apart, and then suddenly their autism rates plummeted. So there is some evidence that vaccine, those 3 together, for some reason, is causing an issue.
Okay, but currently not available.
To my knowledge, not available in America.
Okay. The GRACE Act, religious exemptions. Someone says the people in New York are suffering and thousands have moved out of state. We feel like we're stuck in vaccine prison. Do you know anything about updates to the GRACE Act and religious exemptions?
I don't know if the GRACE, I mean, first of all, I would have to hear what the GRACE Act is again. I'm aware, I've been around the family that brought that, but I don't exactly remember what that did. I want to say it was more about vaccine injury or something having to be listed, but I don't remember what that act is doing.
Okay.
I do New York. New York's in real trouble right now.
Yeah.
So is Connecticut. So is Maine and California. We just won. Officially, I'm going to announce it. I don't know when this podcast is out, but on my show on Thursday, I'm going to announce that we just won the lawsuit in West Virginia. Every child is now going to be allowed a religious exemption out of the vaccine program in West Virginia officially. Right. That costs millions of dollars, my nonprofit, to everyone that helps with our work. That's only made possible because of the people that sponsored us to just stand in courtrooms and fight that to the bitter end. So we are working to make that happen. We have a really brilliant case in New York that we believe is going to go to the Supreme Court. And we hope it's the case that will finally undo Jacobson versus Massachusetts. The vaccine mandate is only legal because of a case that was won in 1905. I mean, you want to talk about antiquated. The only reason they get away with it is like, well, Jacobson versus Massachusetts, which was a minister who didn't want to get a smallpox vaccine, both for religious reasons, but he'd also had bad reactions to vaccines as a child. And they had a mandated smallpox vaccine program. He fought to the Supreme Court and lost. I actually debated Alan Dershowitz during COVID because he had said he believed anyone could be dragged into a hospital forcibly injected with a COVID vaccine, and that would be legal. And he said, and I would love to represent the United States in that case. So I said, can I debate you on that? You can watch it on thehighwire.com. It's a lot of fun.
Okay.
It was a bucket list moment. I would say he conceded at the end. I mean, he certainly said, you brought up a lot of things that I hadn't thought of. And the biggest one I brought up at the very end was, in the end, Jacobson did not have to get that vaccine. Jacobson had to pay a $5 fine. I think you are making a huge jump to say the government is allowed to violate my body over paying a fine. I think, I'll pay the fine. What's the fine? Alan, what's the fine? Tell me what that is and I'll pay that. So that's where we're at. But we have to undo Jacobson. We think we have a case of Amish students in New York specifically that will win for New York. Should we win and probably set precedents for the country.
All right.
So it's deeply involved. It's a huge part of the work that we're doing right now.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And you brought up Connecticut. So to be in a preschool in Connecticut, for example, a child between the ages of 24 months and 4 years old must have a flu shot every year between August 1st to December 31st. And there's no religious exemption. What do parents do? What do working parents do? Move.
I hate saying it. I don't like whether you were your ancestry and you were on the ranch that was handed to you by your great grandparents. That state has turned on you. And it is forcing you to do something to your children that if it destroys them forever, you will never forgive yourself. I want to just make that clear. I think we go, well, I didn't have a choice. And you might get lucky. You might get lucky. They only end up having rashes or autoimmune disease. But let's be clear, flu shots, totally worthless. can't stop the flu. And in fact, the studies now show you're increasing the risk of your child having an upper respiratory condition by over 4 times when you get a flu shot. You're making them potentially going to be more sick and more likely to be sick. That's what vaccines really, I think, do. But whatever the case, should it paralyze your child? Or should it, unfortunately, kill your child? Or should it cause a speech delay or a neurological disorder? They have an encephalitis event, swelling of their brain, which is written in the side effect list that you never see of almost every vaccine. What I can say is, whether you were telling yourself you had no choice, it'll become really clear to you, because I've interviewed the thousands of parents that have made that choice. It'll become clear to you that you did have a choice and you probably should have made it. There is no 20-foot wall around Connecticut, not around California. They're not keeping you from leaving. This is why you move. If you care about your kids, then doesn't matter what job it is, whatever it is, I think you have to move. Unless for some reason you feel like standing your ground and fighting the good fight and, trying to bring California back. I mean, I recognize that. I was there. I'm a big fighter, but I didn't want to be traveling around with this fight and have my kids in a state where, should my child fall out of a tree and break their arm, I'm going to have Child Protective Services called because they want to give them a Tdap vaccine. And they're going to find out I don't have any of the vaccines. And now I'm in the fight of my life, and they're going to try to medically kidnap my child. I'm not going to live in a state where that's possible.
Yeah.
It's too risky.
Right.
And if it happens, as rare as it may be, if there's a chance that can happen, I'm not taking that chance.
Right. All right. Thank you. What is the most important fact regarding all of your years of research on vaccines that you would tell a first-time parent these days?
Most important fact is that what I've spent all this, what An Inconvenient Study is about, which is there's no safety studies of these products. Yeah. You're injected a product that we have no idea what its safety baseline is. And there are millions of people lining up with severe injuries from vaccines that are, we should be considering.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Other than that,
the whole podcast.
And I always say that, people say, "Are you anti-vaccine?" No, I'm anti any product that doesn't go through a safety study. I personally make it a habit to not inject anything into my body that has never been tested for safety and the bodies of my children. Doesn't matter what you call it, whether it's a drug, a vaccine, whatever it's named. I just don't inject products into my children that have never been through a safety study. And if someone can show me a safety study, then bring it to me. Mm-hmm. New York Times, if they want to stop saying experts said, I think it would be the biggest newspaper they ever had if they just published the 16 placebo trials that were the basis for the 16 vaccines we're giving us 72 doses. Put it right on the front page and say, F you, Robert Kennedy Jr. If they want to include my name, Del Bigtree, go right ahead and
throw
do
me
it.
in there. Yeah. Okay. All right. Del has been at this for a while now. Is he seeing a shift, an awakening? Do you feel like the needle is moving in the direction we need it to be? And do you feel Bobby Kennedy continuing to be influential as well?
I couldn't be happier with the progress that I've seen in the 2016. So I've been at this 9 years. Uh-huh. When Vaxxed came out, it was like we were called baby killers. It was horrid. Every newspaper, it was great. It gave us tons of free advertising and packed the theaters for entire years. It was amazing. Mm-hmm. But I think you can ask anyone. Back in 2016, if you tried to bring up any questions on vaccines in your mommy blog or in your group, you were just enough people in there would go bananas that you would be kicked out.
For sure.
That has all changed. In fact, I hear more and more, even in spaces where it would normally be unaccepted. It's like, well, let's have that conversation. So the conversation is now happening. Yeah. When I started in 2016, it was believed that 3% of the children in America were not vaccinated. And that vaccine hesitancy, those that were maybe delaying vaccines or, changing the schedule, might be as high as 10%. And that was bad. They thought that was bad. That's why Senator Richard Pan just wanted to put an end to that. The data now shows that 60% of pregnant women being polled in America are saying they're not going to adhere to the CDC vaccine schedule. 60%. So that's up from 10% of the,
right.
The conservative number. So 60%. 90% of people that are, viable to get a COVID booster are not getting it.
Yeah.
So that means that even people that believed in the COVID vaccine program are now rejecting what was the CDC's recommended schedule.
Yep.
We've never seen that happen before. 50% of doctors, between 30 and 50% of doctors didn't get the COVID vaccine, and now nearly 90% of them aren't getting the COVID vaccine either. And so these are huge, huge shifts. I just had someone, a good friend of mine is a location scout in Hollywood, and he was looking at a big mansion in Beverly Hills for a movie shoot, and realized by the awards on the wall that it was a doctor. And they said, by the way, have you heard about, seen the Inconvenient Study, the Henry Ford health study?
Mm-hmm.
And they said, yes, I'm well aware with it. It's being shared all over Kaiser Permanente, who I work with.
Wow.
It's very disturbing. And I will admit that many of us are starting to take a second look at vaccines. I don't think it's what we were told. I think this thing is shifting. I think the cat's out of the bag. There's too many world-renowned experts now. Peter Gutcha, one of the founders of the Cochrane collaboration, which is the most esteemed body of scientists that have, that sort of started testing all the science around the world to see if it was accurate and raise the quality level of science testing. Peter Gutcha has weighed in on our study, on the Henry Ford study, and he said, look, I've seen the complaint by Henry Ford Health that some of the complaints they have is that there might be confounding issues that can explain this. He's like, there's no confounding issue that can explain the numbers that we are seeing in this study. And he is saying, though I believed in the childhood vaccine prior to this, I do believe this study needs to be done at larger levels all around the world immediately. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of doctors that are calling for a moratorium on the vaccine program. Not Robert Kennedy Jr., people that are now looking at this study and saying, hold on a second. This product was supposed to make our children healthier. Right. If it's making them sicker, why are we doing it?
Okay. All right. I love to hear that.
Yep. I mean, look, the fact that Robert Kennedy Jr. is HHS secretary.
Right. Yeah, of course.
I mean, right there alone. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was standing in the Oval Office when he got sworn in. Yeah. It'll be one of the, probably, next to my birth of my children and my wedding, one of the greatest moments of my life. And I just thought, none of us imagined that something like this was possible. Certainly not inside of the 9 years I started working on it.
Right. Absolutely.
So,
I feel that. I see that.
Yeah.
What in your opinion would be a better schedule than what is currently suggested? Going slow, like what to a parent who says, okay, I'm open, but I'm not going to do none. That's too radical. What would you say?
I'm not a doctor. Mm-hmm. I'm just a journalist.
Okay.
So I can only say that I haven't found a single vaccine I would give my kids. I don't see the reason for it because I've looked at the disease itself. What was the danger of the disease itself? And then what is the potential risk I'm taking on? And I think when I started looking at that, you start coming to different conclusions. But I would just say this. I mean, I don't like to, there's very few vaccines that I'll just say, don't take it. It's like I said, I'm not into giving medical advice. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But unless it's just so ridiculous, like the COVID vaccine. Yeah. Totally ineffective, only dangerous, right? I can't stay in my agnostic position and say, oh, if you decide to. Yeah. But the one that I would say, if you're a new parent, I think the hepatitis B vaccine, which coming up this week, we'll see the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices is finally going to take a serious look at that. Hepatitis B is a sexually transmitted disease. Your child is only going to be at risk for hepatitis B if they're sharing heroin needles or sleeping with prostitutes, or if for some reason the mother is hepatitis B positive.
Right.
You've already had a blood test. You know if you're hepatitis B positive or not, and that's the only risk that child is at.
Yeah.
And so what I would say is, if you know you're not hepatitis B positive, you have plenty of time before your child, and I guess we're all capable of not doing the greatest job with all of our children, ends up, sleeping with prostitutes or sharing heroin needles. But I think you're going to recognize when your child is getting off track.
Yeah.
And before they're sexually active, decide then.
Yeah.
There's no reason to be giving that to a day one old baby. I really pray that the end of this week will be the last we ever hear of a hepatitis B recommendation. I think it's advisory, get back to me where we at. If that doesn't happen, I'm going to be shocked, because there's just no argument for it. So I'd say start there. Start with hepatitis B, get out of the hospital, start thinking about it, and then start looking at the other vaccines. Why would I take it? What was the risk before this vaccine? Try to do your research. Before this vaccine existed, what was the actual number of children that had this issue, prior to its existence?
Or even like the chicken pox. I had the chicken pox. All my siblings had the chicken pox.
Exactly.
We are laughing in our pajamas
true for the measles.
on the couch.
Like measles, even for those of us that I didn't get measles because there's already a vaccine at that point. I didn't get vaccinated for it. I'm kind of bummed. I mean, I wish people like the reporters like, you could be responsible for measles. I'm like, God, I wish my kids could get the measles.
Yeah.
I pray for them to get the measles.
Yeah,
know how much there's so many studies showing how beneficial that is to their health. It's really, people are, it's
the parties.
It's crazy to think about. But also I want to give, so there's two things. You can go to aninconvenientstudy.com and watch it for free.
Yes.
So that movie's free. Also, go to just type into Google FDA licensed vaccines. And that will bring the list of every vaccine that's been licensed. You may want to pull up the CDC's childhood schedule so you can get exactly the vaccines your kids, because that's FDA licensed vaccines are adult vaccines, everything. But if you want to go, okay, here's the ones my kids are supposed to get, and then go do your research. Just read the ingredients.
Yeah.
Do you like the ingredients that you see in there? And then go to adverse events. Both pre and post licensure in there, and read what they are printing as potential side effects. And then ask yourself, is that worth the risk? Is it worth the risk to swell my baby's brain over the chicken pox I know never killed anybody? I think I'd rather they have the chicken pox.
Right.
So, do your research. It's possible. FDA licensed vaccines, and you can read every one. And I always say go to section 6.1. It's always the same.
6.1.
And that tells you all the information I just gave you. What trials were relied upon to establish safety. For instance, hepatitis B, you will read that it was 147 kids in the study that were only monitored for 5 days after the hepatitis B dose. Tiny group of kids, way too small. I mean, one of the arguments by Henry Ford Health was it wasn't a large enough group of kids.
But
and it wasn't a large enough control group. The unvaccinated kids, was only 2,000 there. Hepatitis B, given to a day one old baby, a sexually transmitted disease, only had 147 kids in the study, 0 in a control group. No control group.
My goodness.
Right? And that's enough to mandate that product on every baby born in America. But your 18,000 kids, 2,000 unvaccinated, wasn't a big enough study group.
Yeah.
You can't find a study that big of any of the vaccines at the heart of this entire conversation. So that hypocrisy, I think, is problematic, and it's proving to be very difficult for the other side.
I mean, Del, on behalf of parents everywhere, I just really genuinely want to thank you for your work, for your mission, for your heart, for your tenacity. I know that the ways that you've come under fire, and you're sitting in front of someone who's you saw my kids running around here on our land, healthy, happy, unvaccinated, no sicknesses, living their best life. And that is as a direct influence from you. And I know many people, when I said I was doing this podcast, said, I don't have any questions, but please tell him thank you.
Oh.
So thank you so much for who you are and what you do. And where can people connect with you and stay in touch with you?
Well, definitely, I want you to see the film, so go to inconvenientstudy.com. You can watch my weekly talk show at thehighwire.com. We go live every Thursday at 1 p.m. Central. And you can watch all the episodes we've ever done. We're working on a better search engine in that so that people can just see every time we've ever made a comment. But and then our nonprofit website, icandecide.org, is where we publish all of the sort of the legal wins and the white papers that we've put out. You can follow my socials at Del Bigtree, Instagram and Facebook and
Perfect.
X.
All right. I love it. Thank you so much for your time.
You bet.
I'm just so grateful for the hands this podcast will get into.
All right.
Thank
Me too.
you.